Check out this Parmesan salami with a rich Parmesan cheese, the perfect hint of garlic, and just the right notes of black pepper. This is an absolute delight, and as always, a super fun project to make, so come along for the ride. Hey now, it is Meatfest Salami Day here. We're making a few different types of salamis, and the one that we're going to make right now is a Parmesan salami. It's going to be using pork. There's going to be Parmesan cheese, a few other ingredients in there. It's going to be a fun little experiment. I'm salivating already thinking about it, and let's do it. All right, and here we are. So this is the pork that we're using. We've got boneless pork butt, and we're going with that because it has just an awesome integrated fat to meat ratio. And since it's already boned out, this is really, really simple. All I need to do is get it cut into some nice long strips so it'll run through the grinder really easily. Now, if you don't have a grinder or anything like that, you could go to your butcher and get just some nice, fresh, ground pork butt. You could get picnic roast too if you wanted, but either way, I would get them to grind it at least a couple of times for you because that's going to make everything work out much better in the end. All right, so we've got our meat here. We let that crust up a little bit in the freezer, and it's just time to give it a grind. There we are, and with grind one complete, we're going to give this a second grind to just really beat this meat into submission. All right, so now it's time to actually get this meat mixing up a little bit here. I'm going to use my Hakka meat mixer here. You could certainly do all of this by hand. However, it's a little cold on the fingers, and by doing it like this, you're also not sucking that heat out of your hands and warming up the meat more than you want it to. So I really like using this.
It's way easier.
Way easier. You don't have to keep running to the sink to get hot water in your hands. And I'll just start to mix this up here for a minute before we add our first ingredients. So the full recipe is going to be in the video description. Now, a quick couple of words about some important things here. First of all, we're going with a percentage basis for everything that we run here in those ingredients. So when I talk about the ingredients, it's going to be, oh, this percentage, that is a percentage of the total meat weight. And the reason we're going with that is because then it's super easy for you to just calculate it for any size of batch, any size of meat that you're using. Just take your meat weight, multiply it by that percentage, and you're good to go. Now, speaking of that calculation, we're also operating in grams because math, it plays nice. It just works out super well. So we do everything in grams. We weigh out that meat in grams, then multiply it by that percentage, and you have the exact quantity you need of everything. Makes replication super easy, makes it really easy to use the cure and all those fun things. So there you have it. Now we're going to add our first ingredient. So we have our sodium nitrite, our cure number 1. And this, we're going with 0.25% because that's the manufacturer's instructions for this. However, if you're using a different sodium nitrite product, just follow with whatever they suggest there. We're going to sprinkle that in. And then we've got our Fermento. So this is just a blend of sodium erythorbate and dextrose. If you don't have this particular product, just make sure to use both of those. This is 0.7%. If you're going with the two ingredients separately, it would be 0.05% of the sodium erythorbate and 0.5% of the dextrose. But this is all just combined together. Pop that in. And we're just going to mix this up for a minute or two. So next we're going to be adding our starter culture. What we have here is, it's actually Montestart SP, which is sort of a quicker acting bacterial culture, which is what we like in this. So this called for 0.05% of the meat weight, and then we did that in 0.5% of distilled water here just to dissolve it. And we will mix again for another couple of minutes. Here we are mixing away. This is kind of close to the minimum volume that we would want in this particular mixer. However, there's enough in here that it is going to mix up really nicely.
5% garlic powder.
Ooh.
0.25, some black pepper that we've crushed up a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit better distribution that way.
And then this is a Parmesan salami, so we actually went with a little bit less salt. This is 2.3%.
All right, time for our final ingredients right now.
5% there.
5% Parmesan, which it's a lot of Parmesan cheese. And then
5% red wine.
Ah, yes, we're going with a nice hefty Malbec on this. Flavor Country. Wow, looks like a pasta.
Let's just fry this up.
Yeah, exactly. And now we're just going to mix this up here for another couple of minutes. Okay, and with that all mixed up, we're just going to pull all this meat out here. We're going to pop this back into the freezer for just a wee bit to let it get it cooled down here again prior to our third and final grind. After that third grind, we are ready to stuff. Now, fortunately, we do have this fantastic large vertical hack of stuffer here, and we're just going to run all of this meat into here. I'm hoping that we get all of it into one run, but there's a chance I might have to load up a little bit more. Either way, I'll get this packed up, I can start to go. All right, so we got our stuffer all packed up. We managed to fit all of that in there because this is like, what, 9 and a bit pounds. This typically holds about 10 before it gets too full. And what we're using here are 50 millimeter casings here, and they're about 61 centimeters long. And so we fit probably just over 2 pounds in each of these. And we do this, and let's let her rip. The stuffer makes this process so easy. I'll probably go just a touch more. There we go, perfect. All right, jostle this around a little bit here, hopefully get a decent pack on the inside here. Everything nice and tight. I'm going to just use my sausage pricker here, just to get a little bit, some holes in that, so that this can breathe just a little bit, and hopefully right now we can get even a tighter pack. And we're going to seal it up here with these hog rings. They do a really good job of just keeping this nice and closed. And there we go. We'll get the rest of them done. All right, so we've got these. We managed to fill 4 of them up. We're putting them under plastic wrap here, which we've given just a very light spritz with some vinegar here just to help prevent any unwanted mold growth. Now what we're going to be doing is getting these fermenting in the curing chamber, which we just have heated up at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're going to get these in here. Having the plastic wrap is going to keep the humidity around these salamis nice and high, rather than having to get a ton of humidity in the curing chamber while it's at that high temperature, because that can spell disaster. So the curing chamber here we've got set at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I actually already have another batch of some salami in here fermenting, and we're just going to pop in these Parmesan salami here right now. Yeah, so we're just tucking all these in here. The goal with this fermentation is to hopefully drop the pH of the salami down to below 5.3. That's going to just help with shelf stability. Also, it is going to contribute towards flavor, and colors will change and all kinds of stuff during this process. So we'll give this roughly 3 days in here, and then it should be done. After 3 days of fermentation here in the curing chamber at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, this Parmesan salami is ready to take out and engage in the next step. All right, the final step with this Parmesan salami here is just to get some potassium sorbate on that. Rather than inoculating this with mold, which I don't necessarily always find terribly reliable, I'm going to try to reduce the mold in there as much as possible. Also, if we do have mold growing on this, when we go to package, we're going to have to clean it off anyways. Otherwise, when I vacuum seal it, it becomes just a gross mess on the inside. So I find it a little bit unnecessary. Plus, we already have a ton of flavor going on here anyway. So I'm not bothering with the mold. You do you, boo. Now, I'm going to be using some potassium sorbate for that. I just have that in here in the spray bottle. It's a 3% solution, which is really easy to do by weight. I had 194 grams or milliliters, yes, metric again, of distilled water, and then 6 grams of potassium sorbate. Mix it all up really well, and we're good. Now let's get this to the chamber. And now I'm just going to get these all into the curing chamber here. Now that I have all my salami in the curing chamber here, I do have the temperature set to 53 degrees Fahrenheit and the humidity set at 72% relative humidity. Now you can see that both of those are a little bit higher. However, the fans in here are going to pull that moisture out and get that down where we want it, and the fridge will also cool that down. Oh, wow. Check out some of this white mold that took place here, even without inoculation. Fantastic. Now, it has been 1 month, and some of these Parmesan salamis are at weight. So we're going to pull them, get them cleaned up, and ready for packaging. So I took this Parmesan salami down to 40% weight loss because I thought that would be a really nice amount of drying for them. And I did remove the casings there, even though I had gotten rid of most of the mold. Any of the mold that is on the casing there, when you go and vacuum seal, it does tend to get a little bit greasy, so I didn't want that situation. Now I'm just going to get these here, and I'll slice them into approximate thirds, This is going to be really nice not only for my equalization process here, but also just portioning. Taking a peek at the inside, there isn't much equalization required. It's just a touch darker around the edges. However, I'm going to vacuum seal it so it can achieve the rest of that. So I'm going to use some of my pre-made food saver bags here and just use my food saver vacuum sealer to get these sealed up. And just before I throw it into the fridge, I have labeled it with both the product and the date. As I noted, this didn't require a whole lot of equalization. However, I still did leave this vacuum sealed. I give it a week, which is pretty typical for salamis here. I find that that's a good amount of time for them to equalize, and we're ready to tear into this and taste. With the salami here, you could certainly hand slice this here, and it's going to be just fine. However, since I've got the toy here, I am going to use my Avanco SL10 meat slicer here. Alrighty, let's try this out. Look at that pretty little salami there. Yes. Oh, it's smelling tangy, just a little bit acidic. A little hint of that Parmesan. One thing I'm noticing here right off the bat is that regardless of the 40% weight loss, this is a little bit more moist than I would have expected. Certainly not too wet or anything like that. But I think having that red wine and that sort of additional moisture in the salami just gave it sort of a little bit more wiggle room to lose that weight and still wind up quite moist. But it's got a really nice tight pack on it, so that's fantastic. Now, as far as the flavor goes, I'd say that we've got a little bit of that garlic, we've got some of that Parmesan cheese. This is still like fairly mild. When I initially set out to make this Parmesan cheese salami, I was a little bit worried, like, is this going to taste weird or something like that? This is really, really delicious. I can see this pairing super well with all sorts of things. We're actually going to be having a little raclette evening here tonight, so it's going to wind up hanging out on the cast iron, sizzling up a little bit here and getting some hot cheese dumped onto it, which is fantastic. That's assuming that I don't eat all of it first. There you have it. Delightfully delicious, yet still mild salami. Definitely some equipment involved there in order to make this, but some ways that you can kind of play around with the process and perhaps make it work for a setup that you might have there. Either way, if you're able to make some salami, I highly recommend this. Give it a whirl. If you try it out, let me know how it works out for you. And until next time, keep your salams at 11.